And this is the crude forgery on his gas supply contract. Not even close. And this is not a one-off. We've been contacted by people from all over London who've had their signatures forged on gas supply contracts. Peter Batkins in Cricklewood, Michael Harvard-Bilton in Ladbroke Grove, William Monaghan in Forest Gate, John Aldridge in Potters Bar, and Rachel Silver in Islington.
I never met a rep from London Electricity. No one ever called at my house, no one ever phoned me, and yet despite this, someone had forged my signature on the contract.
This is Rachel's block, and in these flats alone, there have been at least 4 cases where residents have been signed up to London Electricity without permission, all of them involving forged signatures.
It's quite scary that such a large corporation as London Electricity is a company that we've all grown up with, that they employ such unscrupulous characters, and they obviously haven't done their screening process thoroughly.
And Watchdog has discovered that life's about to get easier for unscrupulous gas sellers. Within the next few weeks, every agent will be issued with a so-called walk sheet containing details of a householder's name, address, postcode, and their existing gas supplier. All the information an unscrupulous agent needs to forge a contract and switch a gas supply will have been handed them on a plate by London Electricity.
Oh, pretty shocking. And yesterday, London Electricity confirmed that those walk sheets are soon to be issued. They now say they won't contain details of a householder's present gas supply, but they do admit walk sheets will make it easier to forge contracts. LE, however, insists they do not tolerate forgery by their sales agents, and anyone caught is dismissed instantly. They also say they've signed up 200,000 happy customers. Well, tonight we invited LE's chief executive, Bruno Lescure, to take part in the programme. He declined. We'll have to make do with his photo. The invitation's still open, Mr. Lescure. We're going to leave you in our wanted gallery. Now, of course, London Electricity only covers the London area, and the question is, what's going on in the rest of the country? Is it a nationwide problem? Certainly, we've already received complaints about other companies, rogue methods by those trying to sell gas and electricity on the doorstep. And the complaints start in Portsmouth, going up through Kent, Suffolk, into the Midlands, as far as Northern England and Scotland. And please let us know your experience. You can email Charlotte. Meanwhile, here in the studio, Jenny Kirkpatrick. Now, she's chairman of the Gas Consumer Council. Thank you very much for coming in, Mrs. Kirkpatrick. Did you know how bad this was?
We had a pretty good idea how bad it was, and we've been very instrumental in making sure that the law got changed to deal with it, but it obviously hasn't gone away as a problem.
No. Were you shocked by those tactics they're using?
I think that's pretty appalling, and the allergy to the use of the word gas is really quite weird.
What are you going to do about it?
I want the regulator to investigate this with the possibility of suspending London really as quickly as possible from continuing to sell.
So what you're calling for is for the marketing on the doorstep by London Electricity to cease?
If this is what is going on, it is not acceptable.
What can the regulator do, apart from suspend their activities on the doorstep, which is quite drastic?
It is fairly drastic, and if the regulator isn't satisfied that they have done what they've been asked to do to put matters right, he can take things further, and indeed, if that is the case, so he ought.
How much further? What can he do?
I think he can go to all sorts of methods, not to be gone into here. The important thing is to stop this. If
Can
it's
he
going
take
on,
away their license?
Stop it. Indeed, he might. He can. Whether he would or not, a different issue.
What's caused this problem?
The problem, I'm sure, is simply over-energetic agencies, not sufficiently well supervised, with people who are incentivised in a way which doesn't make sense for the consumer.
OK, Jenny Kirkpatrick, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, next, Scottish Widows. Now, here's that famous ad.
If you're not sure where to turn for savings or a pension, it may be reassuring to know we've been finding our way successfully through the financial markets for 180 years. Scottish Widows, looking good for your money.
Well, Well, very good, very independent, that Scottish widow. However, if the company merges with Lloyd's TSB early next year, and it's a near certainty, eligible members of Scottish widows definitely will be looking good for their money, because windfall payments are expected to total nearly £6 billion, and each member is likely to get a fixed cash payment of £500, possibly more depending on the policy. So, lots of merry Scottish widows, Charlotte?
Not necessarily. We've had an email from Tina Williams. She's not actually a widow. She and her husband Dave took out a joint endowment policy with Scottish Widows last November to support their mortgage. Tina was looking forward to getting her little windfall until she discovered that any payment would be made out in a cheque to Dave.
So Tina asked, how come?
Well, because he's the eligible member, said Scottish Widows. You're not.
Tina said, but I paid my share. It's a joint policy.
Well, it's like this, explained Scottish Widows. His name's first on the form, yours is second, which makes him the full member, and you, well, not quite persona non grata, but not a full member.
Well, Tina tells Scottish Widows she thought it was ridiculous, and if she'd known, she would have put her name first. And they said they were sorry, but they couldn't do anything about it. Tina is very cross, and I don't blame her. It's hardly the image of the fiercely independent widow Scottish Widows say. They're no different to other companies distributing windfall payments. They say it's clear in their regulations that only the first name is the member. But you won't know this unless you actually ask for a copy of their regulations. And to cheer Tina up, here's the Watchdog version of that famous ad. Very nice. Okay, next Eurotunnel. They're operators of Le Shuttle to France, and an astonishing case of Big Brother, and it's been brought to our attention by two regulars using the service. That's John Hewitson from Kent and Matt Ferdinand up in Cheshire. Now, both keep an eye out for special offers to get their crossings as cheaply as possible, and a really massive saving if you do. But Messrs Hewitson and Ferdinand have each this summer received letters from Eurotunnel saying, we've been watching you and we do not like the way you're using our trains, which is very scary. Here's what's happening. Throughout the year, Eurotunnel advertises special offers for their service between Folkestone and Calais, and if you're lucky, for as little as a tenner return. It does tie you to using certain trains, however. Still, it's pretty good when you consider a regular single costs £95. Anyway, John Hewitson, who lives in Ashford, uses the shuttle about 7 or 8 times a year because he likes to stock up on wine. And last August, he bought a special offer ticket, £10, but wasn't sure it would let him return on the shuttle train he wanted to catch. So he actually checked with Eurotunnel.
Well, every time I booked the tickets on the phone, I did ask if I could come back on an earlier train, if there was space available, and they said, yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
Yes, Mr Hewitson went to France several times in the following months, and each time he rang Eurotunnel to check, and he claims they said yes every time. So all was tickety-boo until July, when he received a letter from the managing director of Eurotunnel's shuttle services, Bill Dix.
We have identified that you have purchased several promotional day trip tickets for return travel to and from France. I would like to remind you that day trip tickets are sold subject to our terms and conditions for promotional tickets.
Which, of course, Mr Hewitson knew, which is why he'd rung Eurotunnel in the first place and checked he could travel on his cheap ticket when he wanted to, but the letter went on.
In your case, you do not appear to have complied with these terms and conditions, as we have no record of your return trip.
Well, Mr Hewitson certainly doesn't recall spending a whole year in France, and nor had he. He'd come home. Now, a letter was telling him he was liable to pay £168, and that was only for the trip they knew about. Then there's Matt Ferdinand, a teacher from Stockport. He's another Le Shuttle user. He bought a promotional day return ticket for £25 last May, and he booked by phone. But he stayed in France for a week, so he couldn't use the return ticket. Instead, he bought another ticket and travelled home using that. But Eurotunnel wasn't happy. That observant Mr Dix, the MD, wrote to Mr Ferdinand and said the company knew he'd travelled to France twice using only the outward-bound portion of his saver tickets, and that he could be liable to pay an additional £174. Well, the good news for Mr Ferdinand and Mr Hewitson is that Eurotunnel has been merciful. They've let them off this time, but warned them not to do it again. So what's going on? Well, if you book a ticket with Eurotunnel, you'll get the terms and conditions by post with the ticket, which does warn you that promotional tickets are invalidated if you don't complete the whole journey when they say so.
You could be liable to pay up to full standard single fare according to vehicle type and time of travel.
But the problem is, if you book over the phone and you're travelling within the week, you won't be sent the terms and conditions. Anyway, today, Bill Dix, Managing Director of Eurotunnel Shuttle Services, faxed to tell us, following concerns raised by some of our passengers and by Watchdog, we will make sure that when people call to make a booking, we fully explain the conditions on promotional trips. Now, still to come, PPP medical insurance, higher premiums, less service, say some consultants. And that summer passport chaos. Are you entitled to raid the passport agency's kitty? What a beautiful dog. We think she's called Ursula, don't we? Yeah. Or you've got a better name for her.
Ursa.
Ah, is that in German?
I think so.
Oh, that's
Apparently.
very clever. OK, email, please.
Yeah, on the gas and electricity, Nick Reed and Jason Lee of London say, yep, it's happened to them too. Jan Taylor of Aylesbury, so feedback on that. We're getting loads coming in. BT Cellnet. A lot of people saying they've had problems with their U phones, particularly with a best friend number, which is supposed to be free, and they're actually getting charged for it on their top-up cards. We've had an email in about a Kenwood Chef sausage mincer, which apparently some of the sausage adapters are still rubbing aluminium chips into sausages, which couldn't be very good. Kenwood are aware of it. Check that you've got a plastic adapter. It's probably better. Otherwise, I'd just stick with the butcher's. And James Rushby mailed in on behalf of his nana. She's had a bad time with an electric scooter.
Oh, really? I want to hear more of that. Thanks, Charlotte. OK. Next, PPP health insurance. Now, let's start with the rise in premiums. Take this example. It's the Butterley family in Cheshire. Their annual bill, that's for Mike, Maureen and their children Daniel and Rachel, has jumped by a staggering 92%, from £1,781 to £3,427. It happened in April when PPP merged with Guardian Health, which they were with. Interestingly, the Butterley's new policy claims to offer substantially similar benefits. It's what's known as PPP's Hospital 2, and it's one below the top. Although straight off, it actually excluded Rachel Butterley because she was over 21. Well, the Butterleys queried the increase, but were told it brought them in line with PPP premiums, which have also been increased. Here's an example, a viewer who's 75. Now, she's been 39 years with PPP, and last year her premium was £4,108. This year, she was quoted £5,371. More than £1,200 increase, 30%. And there is another problem. Some consultants are now voicing concern about the level of care being offered by PPP. Another of our new faces, David Bull, reports.
PPP is the second largest health insurer in the UK, with 2.5 million customers. Here's what they promise.
PPP Healthcare. We're here to make things as easy as possible so that you can get on with your life.
It sounds fantastic. It almost sounds too good to be true. So is it? Well, there are restrictions because PPP have a directory of hospitals called the Healthcare Network. Now, if you're ill, you'd think that it would be your doctor that decides which hospital you go to for treatment. But it's not. It's PPP.
Linda DeMesa, a long-standing PPP customer, had heart surgery in February, and she feels PPP were obstructive and uncaring. Her daughter was incensed at her treatment.
She was terribly frightened about having heart investigation and possible heart surgery anyway. I mean, really scared. And then to know that the scheme that she'd been paying into for over 20 years may not cover everything is terrifying.
Mrs. Demetz's consultant wanted her to have the operation here at the heart hospital.
Under her PPP plan, this wasn't allowed. Instead,
she would have to undergo the procedure here at the Wellington Hospital, where, incidentally, PPP are 49% shareholders. This was against the wishes of her consultant.
This is not unusual, and many consultants are concerned about PPP limiting hospital choice. John Randall says consultants are under great pressure to use PPP hospitals.
If a doctor is used to using a particular hospital and he has to switch horses, doesn't know the people, doesn't know the team, hasn't got the equipment, that must have an effect on clinical performance.
So
and
it could
therefore
affect
safety.
patients' treatment?
It could affect patients' treatment.
PPP's restriction of hospitals is countrywide. For example, in the Slough-Windsor area, doctors can now only choose from 2 hospitals instead of a possible 6. PPP claims its choice of hospitals is based on the clinical care given, but many doctors find that hard to swallow and they don't understand why their hospitals have been left off the list.
Some of the hospitals in the PPP list don't appear to be able to offer the facilities that we can offer here. In particular, their X-ray services are lacking in some of the particularly difficult X-rays we need to take on these patients.
Others think it boils down to something simpler.
There are hospitals being left off the recognised lists because of money. The theory being that if a hospital can push more patients through its beds, it would give a lower price to PPP. They would argue it would reduce their subscriptions. I would argue it increases their profits.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you Mrs. de Misa, who you saw in the film, has since fully recovered. Now, with me from PPP, Dr. Adrian Bull, its medical director. You've got consultants saying it there. You're only interested in profit.
Not at all. We're interested in getting best value for our customers and making sure they are treated in appropriate circumstances.
But Dr. Bull, that is 500 consultants in the London area that man represents, and he says you're putting profit first.
There are many London consultants, and many of them operate at the hospitals that we include in our lists, of which there are over 20, perfectly happily and have done for a long time.
But what if I have a consultant who feels I'll be best in a certain hospital? I've been a long customer of yours, perhaps, for many years. Why should I take second best? Why should I feel worried that I can't go to the hospital of my choice?
There's no question of second best. People fly from all over the world to come to the hospitals in our list, including the Wellington that you mentioned in the programme. But the point is that the industry cannot allow personal preferences of doctors to result in a situation where hospitals are half empty so that every patient that goes in has to pay twice, once for their own bed and once for an empty bed.
But who is going to make the decision back at base? Somebody who's never seen me will decide which hospital I go in?
Not at all. If there is a clinical reason to be treated in a hospital which is not in our list, we will pay and cover that treatment.
You'll
without
cover it
question.
completely?
Yes.
So, therefore, I can go to the hospital of my choice?
If there is a clinical reason, if that treatment
Who
is...
decides?
If that treatment is not available in the hospitals that are in our list, we will cover that treatment.
No, but who decides?
The body of consultants that are working in the hospitals that are in our list, because the point is that if the treatment...
So my consultant doesn't decide, you decide, someone who's never seen me decides.
No, I will decide in consultation with the consultant.
Are you a heart specialist?
I can quite happily discuss these issues.
Why should you decide?
Well, why should the consultant decide?
On the basis... all about
me. If I could just finish, because it's a very serious point that you're making, Anne. If there is a clinical service that cannot be provided at the hospital that's listed, then we will pay for that to be treated elsewhere. Consultants will decide for one of two reasons, either because of a clinical situation or because of their own personal preferences and conveniences. And we cannot allow personal preferences and convenience of the providers to dictate this, this
down
industry.
To PPP to decide. Thank you very much, Dr. Adrian Bull. Next, passports. Now, here's how it looked in the summer. Chaos, absolute chaos. Some 500,000 people trying to get away on holiday. The passport agency's computer system collapsed, the situation made worse by the introduction of babies' passports. Nobody knows exactly how many people missed their holiday, but the passport agency said because of the chaos, it would pay out-of-pocket expenses, and that would include the cost of a lost trip. Now, at the moment, the agency claims it's dealing with passports within 10 days. Let us know if you know differently. But complaints piling into Watchdog from people who are having difficulty claiming that compensation. First, Holly Turner, she's 11. Now, in March, Holly was invited to Disneyland Paris for Easter. Her mother sent off for a passport 3.5 weeks before the trip. Holly's ticket cost £150, and the day of departure arrived, but alas, Holly's passport did not. So while her friend went off to Disney, Holly stayed at home.
And I had to unpack. So yeah, it was really upsetting.
Well, Holly's parents had rung the passport office a staggering 200 times to try to get Holly's passport. Eventually, they wrote and asked how to apply for compensation.
We got a telephone call from them to say that it was basically our fault and that we should have waited for the passport to arrive before we booked the holiday.
And as the Turners thought this meant they weren't eligible for compensation, they didn't actually put in a claim. Either way, they heard nothing until yesterday when Watchdog spoke to the passport agency on the Turners' behalf. The agency admits they mislaid the letter and they confirm if Holly applies for compensation now, she'll probably get it. Next, Leanne Hunter from Newcastle. Now, in April, she was due to go to Corfu with her fiancé Rob for his sister's wedding. She applied for a passport 7 weeks before the date of travel, which was at the end of May. But even though Leanne was packed and ready to go, she still had no passport on the day. Rob and 42 other guests went without her, and Leanne spent a miserable week at home. Her mother-in-law, Sylvia, then wrote to the passport office. It was 5 weeks before she heard back, and then only an acknowledgement.
Do, though, believe that Leanne deserves compensation, because obviously the ticket was paid for, the apartment was paid for, so she is out of pocket over it.
OK, finally on this, last week the passport agency told Leanne they'd pay her compensation of £500. That's actually £200 more than her holiday cost, and the extra is for distress and inconvenience. And the delay apparently was because the passport agency returned her passport to the wrong address. So the thing is, can other people expect the same level of compensation? Well, Watchdog has learned that £100,000 was set aside to cover all claims this year. And interestingly, that figure is based on £76,000 paid out in compensation last year, when, of course, there was no crisis whatsoever. Anyway, alas, £67,000 has already been used up, so there's actually £33,000 left in the pot. Please let us know if you're intending to claim. Charlotte, where are you? Oh, hello.
I'm up here on the phone. I've got a very funny email from Lucky Lindsay Hodges. She lives in Brighton, and she keeps entering competitions on Southern FM and winning. And because she's won so many times, they've now told her that she can only enter competitions every 6 months, and she's only allowed to enter now after another 12 months. So she's switched radio stations. What else? Howard Wren from Southampton bought meat in his supermarket, thought he was buying sirloin steaks, turned out to be rump, one of them.
How do you know if you're buying?
He knows, he was in the food trade, he's knowledgeable, Howard. Your hair.
Yeah.
Fantastic news, everybody likes it, all the men like it. Jenny Powell,
no, men don't like it. My husband doesn't like it.
Yes, but he's got to learn, he's got to get with it. They say you're very hip and trendy.
Oh, good.
They love you in Holland as well.
Right, I've got to stop you there, you'll get used to it. That's it for this evening. Don't forget Weekend Watchdog tomorrow at 7. For now, from all of us on the team, good night.
And just for the record, I love your hair. Ricky and Dan face to face in the Vic, and they won't be sharing a pint. EastEnders is next on BBC One Wales.
To admire in my extra-large telescope.
Cast your eyes across that. To be any idea what you'd like to choose from that?
I'd like the television, thank you.
You'd like the television, excellent. And talking about television, are the folk on the station watching you today?
There will be, yes, I would hope so.
And where's that?
I'll wave to the lads at the West End in Newcastle.
That's the fire station there, yeah. Hello to everybody there. Thank you for watching today. If you would like to become a contestant on Pass the Buck, here's the address which you can write to. Pass the Buck, P.O. Box 2617, London W1A 3PR. But from this programme, from Keith, and from our champion Lisa, bye-bye. See you next time.
We all know about the horrors in Kosovo and now in East Timor. You've probably heard too about the asylum seekers in Kent where violent clashes have been reported. We want to be compassionate, don't we? But are there limits? Find out on Kilroy, Monday morning, 9 o'clock, BBC One.
Everyone's talking about it.
I don't want to be on my own. You've got to take me back.
I've got to get out of this marriage.
What was I?
I'm scared. I don't want to lose you.
You lied to me. You swore on this baby's life. Well, now you're going to regret it.
What are you saying to me? It's all your fault. Don't you understand? We don't want you around here, none of us.
Why don't you just turn around and walk out of here because I'm done with you? I don't want her.
The bigger the bombshell, the bigger the fallout. EastEnders, everyone's talking about it. This week on BBC One. Defining moments now on BBC One Wales in Call My Bluff with Bob Holness.